Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, Oxford University is seen as the jewel in the crown of the British higher education system. But the institution came in for heavy criticism yesterday over its record on accepting black students. The data showed that 8 of Oxford's 29 colleges accepted fewer than 3 black students in the past 3 years. Despite the criticism, Dr. Samina Khan, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions, defended the figures and said progress had been made.
Starting from right across all the colleges, actually the number of black students we've taken in has improved significantly. 1.9% of our undergraduate body is now from an African and Caribbean heritage. Whereas if you look at the pool that we're fishing in and we're finding these talented students, only 1.8% come from that black background. So it's a small pool. We have to work hard to encourage them to apply.
And the admissions data caused a stir on Twitter, with Labour MP David Lammy calling the university a bastion of entrenched, wealthy, upper-class, white southern privilege, which he said needed systematic change. Broadcaster Ian Martin defended the university, saying the monstering of Oxford is ludicrous. It is a global institution, not a plaything of government. Fix the school system. But another media figure, ITV political editor Robert Peston, said he felt embarrassed to have gone to the university and said the statistics on its institutional bias against black candidates are appalling. Where is the unhedged apology, he asked. Finally, Toby Young took aim at Peston, saying on almost every diversity measure, Oxford is doing well. At Peston might be ashamed of his alma mater, but I think if he bothered to drill down into the data, he'd be as proud as I am of its record of widening participation. And as if by magic, we're joined now by Toby Young and Ali Milani from the National Union for Students. Welcome to both of you. Toby Young, you got 2 C's and a B at A-level, is that correct?
2 B's and a C.
2 B's and a C, I stand corrected. But you missed your required grades and you still got into Oxford University due to a rogue acceptance letter and a phone call from your dad, is that the case?
That's right. I was sent an acceptance letter by mistake, and then a week later I got another letter telling me I hadn't got in. And my dad rang up to find out which was the right letter, and they said, well, the one saying he hadn't got in. But because they'd sent me an acceptance letter by mistake, they felt legally bound to honour that. And I don't think it was the fact that it was my father calling that made the critical difference.
Are you sure? I mean, people might just say influential father. Doesn't that typify the problem at universities like Oxford?
The reason I say that is because I actually I had lunch with the admissions tutor in question, a guy called Harry Judge, a few years ago, and I said, you know, was the fact that it was my father calling, as opposed to, say, a plumber, that made the critical difference.
Yes,
well, but he said that they'd actually taken legal advice, and they thought that having made this offer to be by mistake, I would have a legal course of redress if they didn't then honour that. So they felt duty-bound to honour it, and that would have applied whoever it had been. But I don't think my own personal experience is relevant here. That's an anecdote. And if you look at the data...
Or is it typical, or does it sort of feed a narrative that is...
Well, it's not typical today. I looked at the UCAS data that they released on Oxford admissions in January, which is what I based that statement on. And if you control for the popularity of the subjects different applicants apply for and the grades they have when they apply, it turns out black British applicants are accepted at an above average rate by Oxford standards, and certainly disadvantaged applicants are accepted at an above average rate too. And just applicants from the North East, which Peston singled out as a particular source of shame for Oxford, actually applicants from the North East of England are more likely to be accepted, have a higher average acceptance rate than applicants from any other region in the UK. The problem is there just aren't enough of them.
Right, no, OK, well, we'll talk about the sort of feeding process. But Ali, were you convinced by what Toby Young said about how he got into Oxford?
Not
and whether
for a second. I think you'll have thousands of students now watching this hoping for, you know, a rogue letter to drop through the door. And I tell you what, if I did have a rogue letter, I wouldn't even know what number to call. I'd have to start Googling, because I wouldn't have a dad that would know which number to call. But I think what Toby misses is that there is an education system that wholly fails black and minority students from the moment they enter the system through admission, and even once they get there. So the trouble that we have when we look at the system is say, well, hang on a minute. When we look at secondary school to sixth form or colleges that students go through, black and minority students face all sorts of barriers to being able to apply, be it psychological, cultural, all the way to the actual admission systems. And then even if they have a dad that rings up and gets them there, we have a 15% attainment gap once they get to university. So, Oxford is actually perpetuates that, because if you look at through 2015 to 2017, one of the more than 4 of the colleges didn't, only admitted a single black British student into these colleges. So I don't know what world Toby and his friends are living in, but there is a clear barrier to black British and minority students getting into Oxbridge universities.
That's simply not true. If you look at the data on the number of black and minority ethnic students at Oxford, it's 17.9% of the total undergraduate British population. The percentage of black and minority ethnic 17 to 24-year-olds in England and Wales is just above 18%. So it's actually almost exactly proportional. If you extend the pool to include graduate students and international students, the percentage of BMA students at Oxford goes up to 28%.
So why?
That's more than 1 in 4.
No
institutional bias there.
The trouble with naming top-line figures is there are colleges currently in Oxford where not a single black British student is in that cohort.
But do you accept those figures, Ali, broadly? I mean, those are the figures that I have here in front of me too, that actually it does reflect society as a whole. If you look at the number of BME students as a proportion of Oxford undergraduates.
Sure, I mean, I don't live in a Michael Gove post-fact society. I recognise the fact that those are the facts.
Yeah.
But the trouble is that top-line figures give you one view, but if you actually go into the cohorts of different courses, there are many, many courses in Oxbridge that are massively, massively not representative of the rest of society.
How can there be colleges, Toby, that don't have any, or didn't accept a single black student in one of the last 3 years?
The short answer is there aren't enough black British students applying. So of the something like 20,000... Well, we'll get into that, but of the 20,000 or so students that applied for Oxford last year, less than 400 were black British. And one reason for that, I think, and this isn't a point made by me, this was a point made by a member of the African Caribbean Society on the Today programme in their package about this yesterday, is that the portrayal of Oxford in the media by various grandstanding MPs and others as a biased, discriminatory institution is putting black applicants off. They're thinking, well, why would I apply to this institution if I'm less likely to get in?
Well, actually,
than a white
answer that,
applicant,
Ali. Do you think that is going to put people? They'll just think it's not for me.
Well, there's plenty of things putting students off. That's true. When the Vice Chancellor comes out and says, we are only going to accept the very best students from across the country, that sets an elitist mindset into the students' minds. Because many of us, even me growing up, I was, fed these arguments that, Oxbridge and Cambridge isn't really for you. It's not really for your kind of students. And the one thing I'd add is, while we talk about these top-line figures of, 17, 18% of black minority students are going to university, once they get there, there's a 15% attainment gap. In the final exams at Oxbridge, only 1 or 2 students actually got a first-class degree. So the admissions process is fixed against them. But even if you are the few who happen to get in, there's an attainment gap that you're making.
Is the system fixed against black and minority ethnic students?
The fact is, Joe, we live in a society which is structurally racist, really. It's not just universities, it happens across the board. I grew up, as you may know, in South Africa, and I know what a white university looks like, and I know what a white university that excludes black people looks like.
But we're not saying here that Oxford University is excluding people, are we?
No, but what I'm saying is that the structure of that society was racist, and that's what made it so hard for black people to get in. And our society is also structurally racist. We have to face up to that.
Right.
And Oxford is maybe doing its best, but it ought to do more. And, I'd like to know, for example, how many lecturers and professors at Oxford are black? How many role models are there for black people at Oxford University? And how much are we doing black history?
Just answer, because we need to move on.
I think Ian Martin made a good point in that tweet you quoted at the beginning of this particular package. OK, focus on what Oxford is doing wrong, what it isn't doing enough of, fine. But actually, there's very little evidence that of institutional bias in its admissions policies, if you drill down into the data. The problem lies beneath that. The problem lies at the school level. Why aren't more sixth forms encouraging black British students to apply?
There's a lack of aspiration, you think, at some sixth forms and schools.
Who could apply, who'd be eligible for places, but who aren't applying.
We need to discuss that on another occasion, or drill down a little bit more on schools. Toby Toby Young, it's the first time you've been on the show since you resigned from the Office for Students Board. Have you had time to reflect on what happened?
I have had time to reflect, yes. It was about 6 months ago.
And?
Well, I apologise for the various things I had said at the time. I stepped down and you know, I have reflected, and I can understand why some people were offended by some of the things I said. And,
a lot of people were offended by what you said.
And as I say, I've regretted saying them. And I think it's a shame that I've had to withdraw for the time being from my involvement in education, because I think some of the things I've done have been quite helpful. For instance, the secondary school I helped set up, and which opened in 2011, has its first cohort of students going to university. About 40% of the students at the school are from disadvantaged backgrounds, but more than 60% have been made offers from Russell Group universities this year, including 6 from Oxford and Cambridge.
Right.
And many of those students
and
are
that
from BME
that
backgrounds.
record may stand, but people will ask, Toby, should somebody like you, who made those offensive tweets, I mean, I looked at a lot of them again to remind myself today, lots of references to women's breasts, other sexually lewd comments. Should somebody like you, who may have been trying to reinvent themselves when it came to your record on education, really be allowed to be involved in schools and education in the way that you want to be?
Well,
Because you indicated that it was just for the time being that you were out of it.
well, I would like in due course to do more, maybe to set up more schools.
But answer that question.
But I think, well, the tweets you're referring to, Joe, as I've said, I've apologised for them. Most of them were in 2009. They were late at night. You know, I think that...
Is that an excuse, Toby, really, for saying them in the first place? You're a grown man, you know, you're responsible, supposedly. You should know what you're doing.
Well, I think if you look at my track record, I've run magazines, I've run large educational organisations, I've run charities, I've employed thousands of people in the course of my career. I've never once been accused of sexual harassment. I've never once been subject to a complaint about my behaviour. No one's ever taken me to an employment tribunal. I've always been very supportive of my female colleagues. I've tried to create a non-sexist environment in all the schools I've set up, an environment that's safe for minorities and LGBT plus people and so forth. So, you know, if you look at my track record, if you look at my actions, not just my words, I think you'll find that...
But words are important, as I'm sure you would agree.
but
The trouble is, it's not really about Toby. It's about, you know, the government created this Office for Students and gave it a very student-friendly name. But what Toby's, you know, appointment onto that board sent the message to us is that the government's not really looking at this in the interest of students. Because when you have an Office for Students that doesn't have the National Union of Students as a representative on it, but you have Toby, who you know, he's been tried in the public opinion and has withdrawn, which we were quite happy about. I'm not sure tweeting late at night, you know, the time of day of tweeting is particularly relevant, but the message that sends to 7 million students across the country isn't necessarily a positive one, where you admit the likes of Toby with what seemed like little research or little work that's been done into it, yet the National Union of Students, the main representative body of 7 million strong in the UK, doesn't have a seat at that table.
You say you were sorry and you apologised and you regret what you said, but are you truly sorry, Toby, when you also said you felt it was part of a witch hunt?
Well, I think it's there's no question that I was targeted by, you know, a Twitter mob, very successfully, as it turned out, because I had to then stand down from that position and various other positions too. That doesn't mean I'm claiming to be guilt-free.
Right.
As I've said, you know, I do regret sending those tweets, and I don't just regret sending them because they resulted in that
But a
reversal of fortune.
witch hunt does imply that you weren't guilty.
it's
Witches don't
offensive.
exist.
But
and
I was accused of lots of things which I'm not guilty of.
Right. But in response to the tweets,
including in the House of Commons,
Right.
By Dawn Butler and David Lammy and others. Dawn Butler, for instance, said that I was a eugenicist who was in favour of weeding out disabled people. She said that on Question Time, and she said something similar in the House of Commons. Completely untrue. I mean, just completely malicious and false.
All right,
And
well,
that's
next
what I
time we'll
mean
get
by-
them on and
by
we'd be
witch hunt.
delighted to have that discussion with them and the comments that they've made. But you did say you thought it was part of a witch hunt, and yet you say you were sorry. So which is it?
Well, I think can't you both regret things you've done, but on the other hand think, well, actually, the punishment I don't think fit the crime in this case.
And
I
do you
think I was being
recognise-
judged for not being virtue signalling, but not for not being virtuous.
Do you, but to some extent, you've made a career at Twitter and being in the media. I mean, you are a creature of the media too, and then it did come back to bite
Well,
you. I
think
mean, that's how these things happen. Do you also recognise Toby's record in education?
Well, I have really real reservations around free schools, and there's one in my community. So I have real worries about his record. But I think it's really offensive also to talk about Twitter mobs and witch hunts, when in reality this was outrage. This is the public, this is women being actually outraged at your words and your attitudes. And if you can't accept that it's outrage and that we're angry because our values are very different, but you call us a mob, that's also a way of dismissing what we say.
All right, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for coming in, both of you.
Thank you.
I've been